and welcome to yet another session and episode of Leadership Summit 2021, organized and facilitated by Policy Circle. Policy Circle is where you go to for the latest in governance, in issues pertaining to the economy, corporates, as well as everything under the sun, if it's regarding news. You can follow Policy Circle on all your socials, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and Instagram. And you can follow Policy Circle to get up to date with the latest in corporates, in economy, in political economy, and business as a whole. Today on the Leadership Summit 2021, we have a fantastic, eminent panel who will be helping us discuss stressed corporates and a post-COVID-19 world. How do corporates of all sizes, MSMEs, large ones, small ones, deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, with the altered consumption, with the disrupted operations, and overall, corporates have been hit. How do they jump back? How do they make a comeback? That's going to be one of the major themes of today's session. And we will employ the minds of Dr. Charan Singh, who is Chairman and CEO, EGROW Foundation, who joins us for today. Shachindra Nath is also on the panel. He's Chairman MD, EGROW Capital. He'll be joining us with his tips on how to raise money. He's a man who should know a thing or two about raising money. He's done that in the recent past. Maybe he can share tips on people who are watching, who are tuned in today on this session, who are live with us and will be watching this later online. Anubha Agarwal, she's a partner, corporate law group. She'll be talking to us a bit about bankruptcy laws and insolvency laws in India and her views on whether or not justice really is done and conflict resolution really how effective it has been after the IBC in 2016. Nirmal Gangwal completes the panel, managing partner, Brescon and Allied Partners. He'll be sharing wisdom with us as well on how really to negotiate the stressed market, the stressed businesses. Thank you all for joining us. So let me start, if I could, with Dr. Singh. Let's start with the outlook, first of all, Dr. Singh, if I could, on the policy front. What more can be done to make sure that stressed businesses have a way out? When does government do enough? When do they step in? The various operational tools that MSMEs, other businesses have at their disposal right now, is that enough in a reality that has been altered completely by the COVID-19 pandemic, which nobody really saw coming, and most countries, if not all, have struggled really to deal with? What is your outlook in a few words? And also, sir, if I could just stress on a game plan that companies could use to wriggle out of this scenario. What are the policy decisions they can take, especially struggling corporates, and what else needs to be done on the policy front? I turn it to you, Dr. Singh.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Mr. Anil. Thanks for organizing this and inviting me to come and speak to this august audience. And I know you're doing a great job, and there are policymakers who are listening to this, and therefore whatever we say really goes effectively in turning into policy. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I agree with you that the outlook is bleak. There's no doubt about it. And I've been into the policymaking circle now in Delhi for nearly 3 years, watching it very closely as to how the whole thing happened, how the COVID happened, and then the amount of uncertainty with which it unfolded, and now no end to that uncertainty. Even as we speak today, we are not sure if phase 3 is going to come or not come. And we do not know if Delta comes to India, what sort of devastating effect it will have. The sad part is Delta is playing very harshly in the US, but US media is not really showing us all the things that are happening because of Delta variant. I'm told there are places in the US where there are no beds available, where oxygen is going to just get exhausted, even in America. So that shows how devastating COVID has been. The last year and a half, I would say, starting from March, has been really unbelievable, very, very uncertain. In a very uncertain situation, when you do not know the depth and the ending point, how do you make policy, both for the government as well as for the Reserve Bank? How do you make a policy? If something we know will end in a month, 2 months, a quarter, 6 months, 1 year, there is a dead end. And you can prepare for it and say, okay, I need to borrow, I need to do tide over the situation in the following way. But here is a disease where nobody knows when it will end. The only way one can look at it is there is a Spanish flu in 1918, and that lasted 2.5 years. It came in different waves. The first wave was X, the second wave was 5X, the third wave was 3X, and then the fourth and the fifth wave waned out. But the problem with 1918 Spanish flu is it mixed with the world wars, and then soon the Great Depression had started sitting in. So therefore, to wean out and say exactly what happened because of Spanish flu is a real challenge. Today, we are in a very difficult situation. There is uncertainty as to the brutality of the virus, as well as the uncertainty of the period of the virus, the way it has mutated, the way the variants have come, and way each variant is far more lethal than the previous one. It becomes a real challenge for both the policymakers at the fiscal authority and the monetary authority. Given this uncertainty, and given that the world is highly globally integrated and that the world is communicating rather very, very rapidly with each other, the IMF and the World Bank have also been playing a crucial role. The IMF has scaled down its growth for India, and understandably, because and in the latest estimates that they released in July, vis-a-vis the estimate that they released in April, because the second wave was so devastating in the month of April, May, and June. The third variant, the third attack, the third wave is still uncertain. Will it happen? Will it not happen? Though most of the countries are prepared, India is also prepared. What will be the impact of it? Going by the Spanish flu, as I just said, the first one is X, the second is 5X, the third is 3X, or between 3 and 2X. We at EGROW have estimated, and we feel it will be somewhere between 2 and 3X. If that be so, it is still very, very dangerous, because we in our country are entering into the productive phase. If you remember, and I'm old enough to remind, earlier we used to have a busy season and a lean season policy. The busy season starts and is connected with the festivals in the country. The festival season is starting. In the festival season, growth is generally high. Monsoon is over, and therefore we can become very, very productive. But if this third wave hits us in the peak season, in the busy season, its impact on growth is much more higher than we would just normally imagine. So now the outlook is that we are in a very uncertain period. Over the previous 1 year, the government, through its Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan and various phases of it, most of it announced in May 2020, was able to handle, guide, and to some extent sustain the economy. The credit guarantee schemes have been started. The partial credit guarantee scheme was started. For MSMEs, NBFCs, the EPF contribution of large corporates, housing sector, street vendors, mudra loans, name it, for different sectors of the economy, something or the other scheme had been announced. The production-linked incentive scheme for 13 sectors had also been announced. The mega investment textile parks, the national infrastructure pipeline, which was announced, the economic corridors, the national rail plan for India 2030, they've all been announced, which ensure sustainability of some activity in the country, and so that the growth doesn't bottom out. As far as the Reserve Bank is concerned, they have one major instrument, the interest rate. Right in the beginning, they realized there's a crisis and they reduced the interest rate. Though I have been saying it needs to be reduced further, but at 4, they have held it constant. That is okay. They have been also giving incentives to exporters, which was important, giving them benefits. the time period concessions for remittances that were given. For the corporate sector, the banks were said asset classification standstill and therefore some breathing space. They were also very, very comfortable in following an accommodative monetary policy, which to some extent I would say was accommodative policy even for the sectors, MSMEs, NBFCs, and the corporate sector as far as asset classifications are concerned. To ensure flow of resources, large exposure framework was widened and therefore the banks could lend it more. Now, your question, what can be done? Now, I was just a month and a half back chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank, a public sector bank, and therefore most of the discussions would come to the board. And the Punjab Sindh Bank itself had been passing through a very critical phase for 13 quarters before it turned into profits. From my own experience, as well as my understanding of the economy as I would see it sitting on the board, I can say this is the time when the corporate sector will have to tighten its belt. And how do you do it? Of course, as an economist, I can tell you if the corporate sector tightens its belt, the demand, the purchasing power automatically gets impacted. But I will come to it in a minute from now. So, how does the corporate sector then take care of these curtailing of costs? I think there are certain things which we did, which corporates we know were planning to do, and those were reducing the fixed costs, entertainment, marketing, all these costs were reduced and minimized. Just the survival of the industry had to be ensured. The capital expenditure had to be postponed. That means the cost of salaries, and that also you and me know it, the cutoff of the salaries ranged between 15 and 50%. But then sustaining production, sustaining employment, and I tell you, this is something which is a case study which we will have to do once things settle down in the rest of the world to sustain demand. They had to come out with the unemployment allowances. In our country, just because the Prime Minister said, don't lay off people, most of the corporates did not lay off people, but then they reduced their salary expenditure. And this is a case study how the Prime Minister says and the country follows. This reminds all of us, especially Lal Bahadur Shastri saying, we are under a food crisis. Can you just skip one meal? And that's exactly what happened so many years later. Of course, new recruitment had to be curtailed. Inventories had to be optimally managed as it is capacity utilization was not at its peak. So the inventory management had to be very, very carefully calibrated and optimally utilized. And one had to contain the receivables and monitor it. In the banking industry, we were very, very careful with the recoveries. We had to take care of that. And then, of course, we had to file for bankruptcy in case that is essential. Now, one thing which I want to say is the Reserve Bank and the government even recently came out with a pre-pack scheme for the MSMEs. So, in a way, they were thinking, ready, where are the stress and how do we address it? Some of the companies, some of the corporates have gone for raising private equity with a large dilution in equity for promoters to save their units and then liquidate the non-core assets. And that I think is very important. This is the time we in Punjab Sindh Bank too looked at the assets and we were wondering in our board many a times how do we monetize our non-core assets? And this brings me to the last point which I want to stress is while the government started initiating measures way back from March 2020 and the RBI supported those measures totally and very, very, I would say, not faithfully, but in a complementary manner, in a cautious but well sequenced manner. Now is the time. And this is where I think there's an opportunity for the corporates. Whenever a country is in a crisis, and this time the whole world is in a crisis, we have to look at how do we now wriggle out the word that you used. How do we wriggle out? Now, the asset monetization scheme of the government to my mind, is a great opportunity for the corporate sector. Look at the sectors in which the government has announced it, all encompassing roads, railways, power transmission, power generation, telecom, national gas pipeline, petroleum products, warehousing, mining, airports, seaports, sports stadium, and urban real estate. The corporate sector in this country can find the area in which it can participate with the government and take the benefits. These are brownfield projects. That means the capex is not required. It's all there. And all that you need to do is bid for it and start participating in it. Now the government is open. Of course, I was going through the guidelines. This can be 25 to 30-year contractual assignments. This needs to be really tapped into by the private corporate sector. And I would say not wriggle out, but I would say flourish. And both the government and the private sector flourishes. And let me just say two things before I close. One, if you want, and if we want, if India wants a $5 trillion economy, it's not going to come with police force, army, civil services, bankers. No, it is going to come from the corporate sector. The corporate sector has to lead, and only then we become a 5 trillion and a 10 trillion or a $20 trillion economy. There's a great example to quote. China was almost where India was in 1978, but the corporate sector, 960,000 foreign companies operating in China, made it a $12 trillion economy, higher than Japan and chasing America by now. So that is the power and strength of the corporate sector. So we need to encourage it. The last point I want to make it is, I and you sitting in India know that the only sector which has the maximum forward backward linkages is the housing sector. And this housing sector has nearly 270 forward backward linkages. You can tell me who has the money to build a house, but I can then come back and say there is the stock market which is touching every day a new dizzy height. That means there is purchasing power. In such a situation, the central and the state governments should start housing projects. And once they start housing projects, 270 industries come into action, get activated, they generate employment. Employment means salary. Salary means purchasing power. In addition
Right.
to the National
See,
Asset Monetization Plan,
uh,
there is a housing plan which can revive the economy. With that, thanks once again for giving me the time to speak to you. Thank you.
that was very interesting, Dr. Singh, because you covered a lot of ground, and one had to be tuned into the conversation about the gamut of topics that you covered here. And I do have a couple of my own questions, but I would first see if the rest of the panelists have any remarks or questions on what you've said. I'll give a chance to anybody who might be interested. I had a short follow-up, Dr. Singh, but since you overshot your time in the first place, you can keep your answer to this one brief. You did mention, I just wanted to play by you or run by you the enormous task that confronts policymakers currently, because there are no second chances at this one. There are no two shots at this. They can't go back and revisit the steps they take in the face of a crisis. So whatever they do is pretty much going to be permanent here. So the enormity of that task of getting it right and making sure that they understand and lean on the corporate sector's expertise on any kind of blueprint or design they come up with to help a stressed economy in the post COVID-19 era. Do you think how important is that going to be?
Extremely important in these times world over, especially in emerging country like India, short of resources. You cross the river by feeling the stones. There are chances there'll be an error, doesn't matter. Just make the private sector join you in your effort to revive. Once again, let me say $5 trillion economy will be created on the shoulders of the corporate sector. Give them the lead, guide them, governance, but minimum governance and maximum opportunities.
All right. Fair enough. I want to go across to Shachindra and Nath on this. And Shachindra, I want to cover a slightly other half of the playground with you, if you will, for want of a better term. But I also want to lean into what I was talking to Mr. Singh about the fact that the enormity of the task is huge. Nobody disputes that. But also, whoever is involved in this design of a comeback, of a recovery blueprint, whatever you want to call it, has to understand that apart from leaning on corporate expertise, which is always a good idea, in my opinion, in times like these, but not over reliance, but also both the corporate side and any governmental intervention policy at the policy level understands that this is not going to be a one size fits all kind of a recovery. Uh, Policymakers have to be very keen on understanding that they can't approach this ham-handedly. There are difficult situations, there are stressed situations that demand specific, tailored sort of answers or solutions to it. And no one size fits all policy is going to end up in disaster. Just touch upon that and then move into your own remarks from there. And I then want to talk a bit about raising funds in a stressed economy like this. Since you recently, I'm sure you'll be happy to share with us, you've had an experience raising uh, quite a few 100 million, I think.
Yeah. No, thanks, Athar, and thanks, Policy Sector and Anil, for inviting me for this. Obviously, the breadth of this discussion and cross section is really interesting and intriguing. I would say that in a situation like this, which has come after 100 years or so, the last similar pandemic was in 1980. First and foremost, whether it is the policymaker or whether other constituent, we have to have the firm belief that this is going to end at some point of time. Now, obviously, when this started, and most of the policy response was designed to believe that there'll be only one cycle of COVID, and this will end in 4 months' time, and everything would be, fine after that. Was to some extent was what is mistake. But whether it is 2 cycles or 3 cycles, unless we don't believe that this is going to end, humanity would survive and would be back to normal. You can't make any policy. And even if you make a policy, the people who have to respond behind that also have to believe that something is going to work. So that's the first one. I'll give you this by an example. As you rightly said, and largely because we focus small and MSME in India and financing to them. When I turned from a professional to an entrepreneur in July 2018, I raised for a lending institution roughly around 1,000 crore. Everyone said, "Wow, such a great achievement." Uh, but when that happened, it was July, and then the ILFS crisis happened in, I think, September of 19. Everybody told me that, oh, you are lucky that you raised money, but what after this? Because as if world would come to an end. And I, said, that's fine, we'll see how it comes. Yeah, then pandemic came, and obviously after that, everyone said, this could be the worst time to start a lending business. And I said, look, that's fine, but end of the day, if this country has to continue, it has to survive. If there's a sector wherein there are roughly around 6.3 crore MSMEs, which employs 11 crore odd people. And if India has to survive, governments have to survive and they have to get their vote bank. 11 crore people population means roughly around 25 crore of indirect vote population. This is not a sector which is going to end completely. Obviously, this is a volatile period and we have to do something about it. And there was obviously the massive policy support which was coming, and we may argue that there something was sufficient or insufficient, but it was there. And we said we should use that and create something which can help and support. Now, from a lending institution, what becomes difficult, and we were trying to do this when we were seeing complete aversion to give money to any MSME. See, MSME, if you look at MSME credit or lending, reason why there is roughly around $600 billion gap, because lenders don't understand MSME. You go and ask, try lending to a small business, you don't understand their revenue, you don't understand their expenses, you don't understand their non-homogeneous nature, geography, everything. Then how do you lend to them? And that becomes a challenge. Fortunately for us, again, which I call the tripod of data, which is happening now in India, which is GST, banking, and bureau. And if somebody utilizes that, so you can move away, and if you have believed that MSMEs would survive, you can move away from looking from a historical past data to what is happening in current. we created a program, and that was, I think, so May of 2020, which was just mid or probably June of 2020, a program called Sanjeevani. It was named Sanjeevani because we took the aspiration that if Lakshman could be revived in a very hostile situation, we should do something to revive SME. Obviously, our size is relatively very small, in spite of our capital size. But the way we said that, what is the method through which in the most difficult time, you extend a supporting hand, you provide credit, but we don't get butchered, because as a lending institution, we lend to receive back our money along with the interest. We did two things. One, we started taking from every prospective customer GST and banking data pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. We created an algorithm which analyze automatically that whether the turnover on GST and cash flow on the banking as pandemic recedes, whether it is reviving or not. Because we are a very sector focused lending institution, we focus only on 8 sector and 100 plus sector. We create a mortality rate. What is the mortality rate? Within hospitality, for example, we created a banquet hall has a mortality rate of 10, which means it won't survive. Fast food chain has 1, which means it would grow back. And we applied that mortality rate to the trend of the cash flow which is coming, and basis that we created eligibility and started generating, giving the credit back. Today, actually, that program of ours, Sanjeevani, so in the month of July, we disbursed roughly around 260 odd crore. August would be better. Sanjeevani still continues to be 60 to 70% of that, and with a stellar performance on portfolio. So it's all about having the faith of being able to support. So in a stress scenario, both the government and the corporate sector, especially lending institution, have to be innovative and provide support. By that innovation, I continue to believe that India would not achieve its aspiration of being a $5 trillion economy unless the contribution of MSME in India move from current 30 odd percent to 40 odd percent. The employment through MSME doesn't move from 11 crore to 20 odd crore, because there are social issues also involved. Large corporate continue to concentrate in big clusters. Small businesses, it goes right up to tier 2, tier 3 town. The recent change in the government policy of retail trade, wholesale trade actually being classified as MSME would change the trajectory of the support which can go to them. It is a massive change which people are not yet realizing. So some of this is coming into fold. I actually, Anil requested me to write an article. I actually wrote on Policy Circle. I wrote an article, I think so, yesterday. I came with this concept of what I call CDGS, which is credit through digitally enhanced guarantee structure. I made an argument. I said, what if think of government? So because small businesses have been hesitant. If you go to and talk to a small business saying, is GST helpful to you? Invariably, the answer would be no. Because they will say, no, this is very painful, this is not right, and government has been troubling us. But if you incentivize them, because for lending institution, GST and banking is transformative, because you can do virtual profiling of a customer. Today, government has a scheme wherein up to 75% of the loan is guaranteed. You change that scheme and you say that every small business which is into GST format and which shows an increasing trend on its GST, it shows increasing trend on its cash flow in the banking, it shows an increasing trend on employability, which you can pick up from the PF data. Government would increase the guarantee from 75% to 100%. Digitization can allow doing that. And if you take the case that even if such guarantee gives you government takes a total loss of, say 5 or 6%, the increase in the revenue for the government just from the GST itself would compensate for that. So if you have a 100% guarantee scheme for small businesses, the amount of liquidity which is there in the market, in the hands of financial institution, would start going dramatically to all the small businesses, and with that capital support, they would start coming back. But for all of it, even for policymaker and the government, they have to believe that a 100% guarantee scheme for MSME won't make the government of India insolvent. It is not possible. But by providing that, you are just unleashing the animal spirit of the economy. So that's, I would say, is the broadly what is required. We are too small to make a real big impact, but we are doing as much as we can. Now, in terms of your second question, if you have a follow-up question, otherwise I'll go to your question on raising
I
capital,
do
right?
actually, because I do have, and with the permission of the other panelists, because you touched upon it briefly, and I would like you to expand if you could. I was reading the G30 report, which came out recently, and it stresses, because you also mentioned that the government at some point providing credit was not a problem. The government was more than flexible, more than helpful. They did that for a while, with maybe not the desired results if you're being completely objective about it, but depends on who you speak to. But I would like to quote a couple of points from that report, and I'd like you to speak and your mind on this. It says government should allow existing stakeholders to take appropriate losses, which is fair enough, understandable. I'm sure everybody is on board in that. It also says that policymakers must carefully tailor their support to the unique situation of different firms and sectors, with particular attention to micro, small, and medium enterprises. And because MSMEs obviously are the largest commercial users of insolvency systems, and obviously are hardest hit by a pandemic-like situation. But it also says, and this is the most important point, and I would like you to speak on it. The report highlighted, Shachindra, the need for policymakers to pivot from facilitating access to credit for businesses toward a focus on better corporate restructuring. Now, corporate restructuring comes with it, gets with it its own set of problems. What do you think of this approach?
Yeah, so I think so. Look, when we talk about small businesses, we really talk about small businesses. In India now, actually, up to 200 crore turnover companies are also considered small businesses. But the universe which we look at are, companies which are sub 5 crore turnover. So they are really small businesses. Our view is that actually facilitation of, because see, these small businesses are led by an entrepreneur whose livelihood is dependent upon it. What we have seen in the two cycle of pandemic, that while the every time the pandemic hits and there is a lockdown, the his ability to pay back drops dramatically, but same way the v-shaped recovery is also extremely fast, is because the small business makes that endeavor to survive, and that's the core difference between a mid corporate and large corporate. Mid corporate, and by intent, mid corporate and large corporate want to do restructuring, want to do XYZ, want more moratorium, want more money. Small businesses want to survive because they have a livelihood attached to them, right? It's their personal property, it's, sometimes their personal guarantee, their reputation, goodwill. In a country like India, think of a tier 3 town where in a small business running a merchant shop, he just cannot afford to go out of the business because of the social stigma attached to that. And that forces them to survive. So in that scenario, if you have ability to provide, so government of India doesn't have the ability to provide direct balance sheet support, but the liquid, which is what they have been doing, the liquidity available in the market, you provide what I call off balance sheet support. And that's why I said that if you increase, if the government has the feel, they know that it is in their benefit to make sure that this segment of the market has to come out of the pandemic related stress fastest, then they can increase their penetration. They can increase what they can do for it. I think so. When I speak to policymakers, and I define policymakers is not the politician, but the people who actually under direction of politician write the policy, right? So in my studio like
Great
Banaras, we used to call
bureaucracy.
babus, right? The problem is
Great
that,
Indian bureaucracy.
yeah, so the problem at that level is that they start getting worried about. So if I remember when emergency credit line was coming up, and somehow I was consulted, and they wanted to again come emergency credit line with a 75% or 85% guarantee scheme. I said it won't work because you're expecting in the mid of pandemic a bank to lend and have a 20 or 20 or 15 or 20% risk associated with them. They have no reason to do it, because if it's a public sector bank, if they end up doing that after 2 years time, somebody would come and penalize them saying why you did that. There must be some other interest of yours. Private sector bank responsible for their shareholders won't do it. And that's why fortunately in emergency credit line, the guarantee scheme went all the way up to 100% and see its impact. So I think so for a period of time, if government come and have the courage, and especially the below the politician, and feel that economically it won't deteriorate government's balance sheet, and provide that support at a at a full aggregate level, you will see the revival happening much faster.
Before I move on, just for my benefit, how much did Pratham, that particular one, raise when you did that?
No, so okay, so I'll just differentiate. So you know, so we raised. So EGROW is a non-bank finance company which is trying to build India's largest small business financing platform. We are a conventional plus tech-enabled platform. We use the tripod, as I said, of GST, banking, and bureau to provide credit dissemination. We raised roughly around 958 crore of equity capital in July of 2018, and now we are supported by roughly around 42 lending institutions, almost all the universe of public sector banks, private sector banks, small NBFC. We are now tapping DFIs. But we simultaneously are now extensively working with large public sector institutions and some private sector institutions to bring the model of co-lending. So the program is a program which we have launched recently along with Bank of Baroda. It's a 1,000 crore program when we are trying to bring the cost of.
Because I had read about it and I just wanted to get the number right. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a 1,000 crore program of co-lending. First time a lending institution, an NBFC, which has gone live, digitally integrated, enabled a public sector bank, fully accepting our credit model of asking no balance sheet, no income statement, no income tax return, purely driven by GST, banking, and bureau, at a lending cost of 8% to 9%. We are trying to reduce the cost of lending because, see, the public sector institutions, especially the banks, have the power of capital. We have little bit of understanding of innovating on the front end, finding customer, innovating, disbursing. So I think it's a very good marriage. I'm very, very positive that India's MSME need would be very well served with this, what I call public-private partnership, first time in financial institution segment.
Model perhaps more institutions, non-banking financial institutions need to look at, looking at the success of
Athar, Dr. Singh would like to comment on this. Ask him.
Yes. Dr. Singh, I believe you have
a banker. Yeah. Sorry.
I think he made a very good presentation, and I'm solid with him the way he has mentioned it. And this the partnership between the public and private sector. I keep saying, if we have to be a $5 trillion economy, we need people like him, and we need sectors like him. And I tell you, he's so right. MSME is the only sector which will take us into the. We have to employ our young population. The demographic dividend will only become a dividend, otherwise it's a disaster if we do not follow what he's saying. And when he mentioned that he calls the small sector 5 crore and less, but then he gives an example of a small shop in tier 3 city which has been given the MSME status now. I think I won't take too much time. I'll just give you one example. The given India situation of capital constraints, if I give 10,000 rupees to the shopkeeper, the type he's mentioning, or a sculpture, or a village and cottage industry, I create 3 jobs. Whereas 10,000 rupees given to the big industries, I create nothing. So I'm with him. That is where we need to keep the young minds engaged, productive, and that's the way ahead. Totally convinced of what he's saying. Thank you for asking.
Okay, Anil, I'd also, we have some questions from, I believe, people who are tuned in. Should we take them now or can we take them later? Because
I think later I think later. After all the presentations are over, people will be relaxed. Yeah.
Fair enough. So we'll ask people who are tuned in to keep sending the questions. I can see your questions. We'll record them and we'll ask each questions at the end of each presentation. Do keep writing in. Mr. Gangwal, I hope you've been tuned into the conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. Shachindra, of course, also added another dimension to it. And we were coming to, of course, how just extending credit and a helping hand is not going to be enough. Sometimes the time comes when restructuring is a reality. It's something that corporates or struggling corporates, stressed corporates can't really hide from. Even if it means keeping the existing owners or promoters in control. And since you have, a fair amount of expertise in the stress business space, we would now like to know your outlook on how to deal with a scenario that has presented itself in more than 100 years, and the kind of disruption we've seen clearly, even the Second World War, that kind of economic disruption kind of completely surpassed after COVID-19. It was that kind of an event. Now, in this scenario, Mr. Gangwal, how can companies who are staring at an uncertain future, given the kind of, the harshest critics would say lackluster approach or policy from the governments, various governments, not just ours, but and also the couple that with the fact that some companies will have to restructure. How can that restructuring or downsizing, whatever you want to call it, be painless, as painless as possible for everyone involved, including promoters, owners, employees, the workforce, everybody? And what else can be done? Some practical steps for people to save their companies, and what needs to be done at the policy level. Some policy recommendations, Mr. Gangwal.
Thank you, Charan. Thanks for questions. You have very, very valuable questions, and Mr. Anil also to conduct such of
You seem to be having some audio difficulty. Now I think, Mr. Gangwal, you can go ahead.
Oh.
I think we might be having an audio issue. If perhaps Vivek could check the connection while we figure that out and sort that out, we'll take another round and we'll try and get to Anubha, who is, I believe, can hear us perfectly. So we'll try and work on that. We'll be back with you, Mr. Gangwal, as soon as we can. But Anubha, you've heard other speakers as well. I also would be very interested in knowing your outlook. Also, the fact that the other end of the spectrum, we've talked about how corporates have to help and how everything needs to be done at the policy level. But if you are facing restructuring, but all that is not going to help your company, you are going down. The kind of tools available, at least in the country here, we can talk about the IBC and what the effect has been after 2016. Has it been a success? Is justice being meted out? Is justice being done? Is conflict being resolved because of those options open to us? Your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Athar. At the outset, I would first like to thank Policy Circle for organizing this and for inviting me. And as we are seeing, we are in unprecedented times with COVID-19. And the topic on resurrection of corporates is actually necessitated in these dire times that we are facing. What I have prepared is a small presentation. I hope it's visible to all of you.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is basically to talk about how insolvency laws actually have helped corporates resurrect themselves and reinvent themselves. And as we know, before 2016, there was a huge vacuum in this law and for corporate insolvency. And what it was marked with was a lot of bad debts and loans. And what 2016 brought about was a huge shift because it gave hope to the economy on recovery of loans. But the best part with bankruptcy law has been that though BIFER did not help with the cases and there was a lot of asset deterioration and stressed assets that was happening, what bankruptcy law focuses on is resolution of insolvency and not just on debt recovery. And not only that, it focuses, the focus is on a very time-bound manner and adopting the British playbook of a creditor in control model. This actually leads to what actually has led to, I mean, with all of this, what has happened is that there is a lot of behavioral change in the ecosystem of the creditor. Now, earlier, if money was borrowed, there was this mindset that it is not necessarily to be returned, but that is not the case with forensic audit, with SFIO. Money, I mean, the credibility of or the investor confidence has gone up. It has improved the credit availability in the market and has also led to more entrepreneurship. At the same time, balancing the interest of all the stakeholders. All of them have actually been taken care of under this law, which was not the case when BIFER or SICA were operational. In fact, at the time between 2002 to 2016, it was only distressed assets. Uptron India is one case which is not resolved till date. So though this law has received a lot of flack, for various reasons, which range from from haircuts to the adjudicating authorities being overburdened, which we will talk about in a while. It is a beautiful piece of legislation which needs to be protected, especially in this time. And I guess every law takes its own time to absorb into the ecosystem when it's new. What it actually did was a major relief for a lot of companies that were struggling in the last year, which was from March 2020 to March 2021, where the operative provisions of the law, they were suspended. And so there was no CIRP which was going to be initiated. And it increased the threshold from 1 lakh to 1 crore so that small companies could get some relief. So there was a complete suspension of its provisions, which helped a lot for the companies to operate and would not have to go into unnecessary liquidation. And what we also see, if we compare it with how it has been outside of India, is that the time which was taken for solving insolvency cases in various other countries was always much lesser than in India. India takes about 4.3 years in resolving cases. But the ease of doing business index actually shows a lot of hope for India, because pre-IBC, before this law was brought into picture, India ranked at 135 out of 190, and after this law has jumped to the 63rd position in the world, which actually is a huge boost to the economy and shows that we not only now focus on recovery of money that has been lent, but we focus on resolving issues. We focus on resolving the problems with the corporates, because it takes a lot for a company to be set up and to be structured. And it involves a huge value chain, which includes its employees, its suppliers, its creditors, debtors. And to close down an association may be simpler, but this entire economic chain needs to be safeguarded. And it seems like one company goes into liquidation. For example, LML. When LML went into liquidation, there were about 40-50 ancillary entities which were exclusively manufacturing for LML, and they also went into liquidation. So it's not just one entity that goes down, but an entire setup that goes down with liquidation. So that I guess is something that needs to be focused on, and resolution needs to be emphasized going forward. And also, if we compare IBC with the laws outside of India, US focuses on a debtor in control model, which interestingly has now been introduced by IBC by way of pre-pack. So we'll go further into how we can actually bring about a change in IBC going forward in the future. There is requirement of policy change, and there has been a lot of talk about an overhaul to be brought about in this law. But I would suggest that, and in fact, this is something that is open to deliberation, is that instead of piecemeal changes in the law, there is need for a consolidated change to be brought about where all interests are taken care of. And something that Mr. Nath also mentioned earlier, that it's important to take into consideration the specific requirements of businesses. And they cannot be like a single solution or one-stop solution. It has to be customized to the requirements of various industries. So as far as policy change in future of IBC is concerned, we'll just take these points quickly, one after the other. Why is it that there is more liquidation in India compared to resolution? So since this law received a lot of flack on liquidation, we need to take into consideration the fact that when this law came about in 2016, the economy was already grappling with demonetization, and the market sentiment was not bullish. So the investor did not have confidence to put money in stressed assets. Whereas what focus needs to be brought about for resolution is that there should be enough assistance available to a potential buyer to be able to purchase stressed assets. So if there is an artificial intelligence platform or a digital platform where one can go and look at the assets, the wide array of assets that are available to purchase from, it will be beneficial for an investor and also for an insolvency professional, which seems to intrinsically struggle because of lack of such a platform and uses its own resources in order to bring together a buyer and a seller as an intermediary. Another reason why resolution is necessary and should actually be given a lot of emphasis is that instead of focusing on the liquidation value or the fair market value, there is need to focus on the economic value. So say the economic value of an asset or an enterprise is 5 crores and the liquidation value is 1 crore. Generally, what happens is that a company would be liquidated because it will not have a high liquidation value. Whereas if it can be saved, then it is best to save it, maybe even shift it to something like a bad bank for some time, so that it is possible for the company to come back and to resurrect itself instead of just going down and liquidating. The other thing that needs to be focused on is the first pillar of IBC, which is the insolvency professional, which is the intermediary between the resolution between the debtor and the creditor, and also to not only strengthen their education and their governance, but the fact that they actually struggle in finding the right kind of assets, in bringing the two parties together, and also in resolving. Now there are IPEs, insolvency professional entities, but these entities, they focus, the focus needs to be broadened so that tailor-made solutions can be given. So if there is, say, an IPE which is good at solving solar power project cases or hydro cases, then it should be possible for the IPE to resolve those cases and not just go for those companies where its own directors are insolvency professionals. This will lead to better solutions and faster resolution process. Now, what we also experience with COVID-19 is that there are certain industries which need a longer protection time and a longer holdout, like the travel industry or the hotel industry. Now, if there is consolidation of these industries and they are closed because they are not operative right now, like it was also mentioned by Mr. Singh, there will be a time when this will get over. This is not going to, we have to believe that this will get over and it's not going to continue forever. But during that period of time, a longer holdout is needed for these industries, because consolidation will only lead to monopolization and will reduce competition that is possible in the market. So it's important for this kind of holdout to be brought about so that rebouncing of these industries is possible. And a major positive impact that we have seen from COVID-19 is how the future of IBC seems to change with digitization. Earlier, it was not possible that there was an online hearing that was taking place, and a lot of time would go without an online hearing opportunity. Now, when online cases are being heard, the time-bound nature of the court, which is a maximum of 330 days, that can be protected, and that objective can be protected. So not only online hearing opportunity, but also focus should be given on better judges, on a lot of technical members to be on the panel, and also specialized benches. So IBC matters, if they go to NCLT, and all other company law matters and Companies Act matters also go to NCLT, there is a lot of clogging of NCLT. So that declogging is possible if there are specialized benches which are specifically looking at insolvency cases. Another point which has actually been in the limelight and a lot in the news is the haircuts which the creditors have to suffer and take, and banks have to take. And there has been a lot of recommendation by various committees, by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, on putting a maximum limit on haircuts. So it's also important to deliberate on whether this kind of model or this kind of haircut is viable or not. It is firstly necessary to understand that IBC is not responsible for haircuts. What happens is it's the market forces that should determine how much haircut should be taken by a potential creditor, and it should not be putting a limit, in fact, on haircuts will actually make the asset lose its asset maximization value and its economic value, because what happens is actually that the asset loses its enterprise value. So putting a maximum limit is not going to be favorable from that sense. Moreover, it also gives banks a reason to lend out riskier loans because there is a minimum amount which is safeguarded. So that is another thing that we can deliberate upon when a change is brought about in the law. There have been about 6 amendments in the law since the 5 years of IBC, and these piecemeal changes have only led to mistrust in an investor, in an executioner, and also puts a question mark on the policymaker. So I guess it is time to revamp it, but to revamp it in a manner where you come up with consolidated solutions. Even with prepacks, we see that prepacks is a very interesting model and an amazing model for MSMEs. As we've been talking about MSMEs, they are actually the backbone of the economy for a make in India, self-reliant India, and they have been suffering due to distressed assets and lack of liquidity. But this debtor in control model is actually a paradigm shift from the objective of IBC, which has a creditor in control model. At the same time, it also is important for focus on this because MSMEs, like most of the businesses in India, are family-owned large businesses. And these family-owned businesses, whether small or large businesses actually, there is a face value attached to the person who's running the business. And if the management is taken away in the hands of the interim resolution professional, and it is the COC which looks at the workings, then it is not possible to run that organization. And in that process, it takes up a lot of time. So a debtor in control model is a helpful model from that perspective. And it is also a reduced timeline model, which brings in both the judicial process and the out of court process, where a pre-packaged base resolution plan is decided upon, and thereafter the CIRP process starts. So the question that I have before everyone and for deliberation is that why should we just limit this to MSMEs? We have seen in the case of real estate as well that home buyers have not been able to find a solution. And even though they were made financial creditors, JP was one example where NBCC took over, but wouldn't it be better to have a separate class and to bring real estate out of IBC, whether it is by way of an amendment in RERA or otherwise? But it is important to understand that a solution that is to be brought about for an investor or a home buyer is for him not to take a cut, but to be able to provide him with the home that he has invested in, because no home buyer is interested in a cut but wants their home back. So not only limit prepacks to MSMEs, but also to real estate and to industries which are niche in character, and they require this kind of tailor-made solution, just like is the case with NBFCs, which are out of the purview of IBC. So going forward, what I would, for deliberation suggest is that the first version of IBC was when IBC was introduced in 2016. The second is when this prepack system has been introduced, which is like a huge policy change in the right direction for MSMEs. And the third would be to bring about a change in the law, which is not in bits and pieces, but is holistic, so that you're not filling in one gap and then creating another loophole, but a holistic future of IBC is brought about with a consolidated law which takes into consideration the niche sectors that are present before us and consolidates all of that, keeping in mind the interests of all the stakeholders. So with this, I'll end this presentation and over to you, Athar.
Well, thank you, Anubha, for that, I would say, fairly exhaustive presentation. I learned a lot, clearly. You've put some time into it, and we thank you for that. If whoever's plugged in right now online didn't know these many questions that would have been asked, now you know, because Anubha answered those questions. And she posed a couple of good questions at the end as well. And I would like to throw it out there for anybody who wants to comment on what Anubha has just said. I have a couple of comments to make, but I'll wait for anyone else who might want to say something on what Anubha's presentation. maybe not now. Maybe we'll come back to the questions you posed at the end of it. Why keep real estate within the IBC, and why not just take it out of it? And other questions like that. We'll come back to that because that's a relevant portion of the discussion, I feel, and should be touched upon at least. Mr. Gangwal, I hope, is back with us. Mr. Gangwal,
Yeah,
we did have some problems earlier. I believe you can hear us fine now as well as
yes,
see
yes.
us.
I can. In fact,
Whatever
I'm
little of
on
the
a.
discussion you got, I hope you
No,
some of the discussion.
I was participating in a session, except that I am sitting on a hill station and we have poor connection, so it will keep on bugging. But let me, without taking much of the time, I think all the earlier speaker has covered most of the ground, and I have a very less to perform. Only thing is that let me start with my own story, that how did I handle my own adversity, and how did I converted my adversity into the opportunity. So way back in 96, 97, my own account has become NPA. Okay. It was a very small account like MSME, and I was a young chartered accountant that time. And I realized that taking money from the bank and relending to the again customer needs a different architecture, needs a different risk matrix, need a different system and process. So immediately after I realized that my money is not coming from my customer, I said, Mr. Gangwal, you stuck up. This is not the job which you can do in a better way. I reach out to my lender. I explain to them, ki, look, I have a problem and I need to resolve this problem. Of course, you have given me money. It's my responsibility. Bankers didn't believe me in 97 that I have a problem. He says, no other NBFC has a problem. How come you got a problem only? I said, I don't know about others, but I have a problem. So it took me about 8 to 9 months time to convince them that I have a problem. And thereafter, they did a restructuring. At that time, there was no IBC, no CDR, no provisioning, no RBI even mention about this business of a standard or non-standard. So bank did a restructuring for 10 years. But my conscience, it was biting me that something is not good. What is the banker's fault? I have somehow not done the business the way business should be done. And I was good at ideation. So I said, look, like me, many businessmen might have gone to either an error of judgment or external situation. So when they face adversity, what they do? So I have paid off my entire loan to the bank within 2 years instead of 10 years. I divested my personal property. I divested the company property and became a debt free since then. And since then, my problem became my product. Since 97, when I hit a problem and I became debt free in 99. Since 99 is a Brescon, we must have restructured almost 1,50,000 crore of a debt, whereas my problem was only 5 crore. So I converted my problem into a product, my adversity into an opportunity. And only last year we realized that, okay, how did I could do it? So I thought, let me share my experience with the audience as a learning. So I believed in that there are three principles which I have practiced in my life, in my career. One is that when you have a problem, when you face a problem, you confess that you have a problem. We as a Indian, we feel that problem means failure and failure means stigma. This is our cultural issue. Our parents, our teacher, our forefathers never taught us that failure is a innovation. Beta, you can be failed, no problem, but keep on doing it. We tell that no, you cannot be failed. If you're a fail, you are a fail. You are socially bycast. So I feel that this is the biggest learning I learned. And the moment I faced a problem, I immediately said, Nirmal, this is a problem. You have to address it. So I think confess is the first thing, whether it's a pandemic related problem or we have seen 30 years in this practice of a problem facing and creating a turnaround story. Pandemic is one of them. I think there have been many. We have seen maybe 3 or 4 bust cycle where sometime the infrastructure, sometime the metal circle, sometime the power, sometime the textile. Everybody goes through this problem, and we are not preparing our mind whether how to deal with the problem. Even in our MBA chartered accountant, we only show how to deal with the project finance, how to raise a new money, how to make a CMA data. None of our teaching it is taught that when you face a problem, how to deal with. So coming to the point that when you face a problem, first thing is to admit that there is a problem. So first principle is the C of is a confess. Once you admit the problem, I think half of the battle is won, because then you are not in a denial mode. You are not trying to create a story and develop a story and telling something else and doing something else. So half of the problem is resolved once you confess that there is a problem. Second problem which I see in India is that because of the social stigma, we don't communicate. We don't communicate problem even at the home. The husband doesn't communicate with the wife, the son doesn't communicate with the father does not communicate with the son, because don't tell this problem, because it is not an, it don't talk negative, talk positive thing. We have been taught to talk positive thing in the life. Bhai, this is a business, this is not a business before license, Raj. Whereas you get a license to build a cement factory, it's like a license to make the money. Today, competition, globalization, things are so become competitive that business means it can be both 50 fail, 50 pass. There is no guarantee that business means it's a success mantra that you have become a businessman. So the second principle I realized is the communication. So when I had a problem, I reached out to my lender first, and my lender could not believe that my account is standard and I am going to have a problem next quarter. He said, "How can you be like this?" I said, "Sir, I am going to face a problem next quarter. So please help me out." So the second principle is that you communicate with your stakeholder, whether it is your employees, whether it is your family, whether it is your banker, or whether it is your supplier or your customer. I think if you can communicate your problem before in hand, well in time, I think you again won a 90% of your battle, because each stakeholder in your business, whether it's a lender, whether it's a customer, whether it's a vendor, whether it's your employee, they are your partner. They are not partner only in prosperity, they are also a partner in the pain. So it's a mindset issue in the India. I think as a corporate world, as a business world, we must learn in the life. And I always tell my client that have you built when you put a new project finance, you always create purchase department, sales department, CFO. But I said when you hit a problem, what your CFO will do? You must put a chief liability manager, CLO, chief liability officer, that when the problem happen, how is going to face? Are you prepared? No. So this is another issue which I have practiced in my practicing career, that you must communicate and you must communicate honestly. And third principle is the commit. That once you know that there is a problem, and once you communicate with your stakeholder that there is a problem, and then as a business owner, as a sponsor, you have to come out with the solution. Like in my case, I realized that, hey guy, you are a small guy, you cannot borrow and you cannot lend the money. You require a huge infrastructure to build your risk mechanism, to have a legal team, to have a lot more understanding the sector, their risk and all. We didn't have, but just because of ambitions, has a no control, we also venture into a business at that point of time without learning the game of the business. This is what happened. So once I decided that I'm not good in this business, but I'm good into ideation business, I must have helped almost 1,50,000 crore worth of a debt where I was good at. And I committed. I said, look, this bank loan is my problem. I have to resolve it, whether it is a sacrificing my personal asset or sacrificing my anything. So I have divested asset, I have paid off to the bank, but I was convinced about my business model post problem that I will be winner. I was having a confidence. So I think if you really apply this 3C principle in the life when you face adversity, confess, communicate, and commit, You cannot say that I can't commit, my banker will commit. Sorry, doesn't work that way. Banker is a banker. They give you money for recovering of their interest. It is your problem and your ownership to really come out of the problem and show a path of recovery. So, like say in our 25-year journey, we studied cases whereby we are coming out with a book where we are showcasing 25 cases which were once upon a time were not having a good rating, maybe D rating or maybe a B rating. Some of them has a different issue, change of management issue. Today they are AA plus or a triple A plus. Their market cap uh, could be 2 lakh crore of the companies what I am talking, whereas the market cap when we have done the work may not even 2,000 crore. Now it means something worked, and we also have another cases where things did not work. So we really then analyze the whole thing and we realize that the only thing which work is that you must be into a viable business. Suppose before COVID also you were in an unviable business, and with the COVID definitely you have to close your business. You cannot blame government or regulator or the banker or like that matter. It's better you clean up the thing and say, look, this was a not good business. But if your business is viable, I can tell you with my experience that if anybody has a viable business, and if anybody can say as a promoter, I am willing to commit myself, there is my skin in the game in a revival. I think there is enough regulation, there is enough money which can come on the table, and all the business can be converted into a turnaround viable story. The problem lies that in India, many businesses are of sub-scale or promoter is incompetent. Just because of you come from a business family and you are in business doesn't mean that you have a license to do a successful business. The business require competency, business require capability, business require tenacity. So I think in businesses, I agree government support is required. I agree that MSME are the backbone of the country in terms of a job, in terms of a creation, taxes, etc. But I'm also a strong follower that business require a different mindset. It require a different tenacity. It require a different commitment, and you have to be honest. Let's say in America, if a business is gone bad, how a promoter, how a sponsor is not hesitant to go and tell the lender, hey, Mr. Paul, my business is not doing good. I don't think so I can work it around. And then the same lender sit with him and, okay, tell me, Mr. Peter, what is the problem? I understand you can't do. But here, if a promoter goes to a banker, he's also again an Indian. So he say, hey, don't tell me your problem. Somehow you manage your problem. If you require some more money, we will give you, but don't talk about the problem. So I think in India, we have a mindset issue. Otherwise, it's a great country. We have a huge unmet demand, huge infrastructure is unmet demand, consumption. We are ambitious people. It's a young population. If you really see, we have a all tick right for India as a growing economy. The government is also doing a great thing. Let's say the Indian public sector bank, they are the lifeline of businesses. What they have done over last 50, 60 years, it's because of them that they have been managing. Today, I find that there is a trust deficit between the lender and borrower. There is a trust deficit between the regulator and the lender. There is a trust deficit even at the government level to finally things will work or will not work. I think with this type of a situation, this doesn't go in the business. Today is the time where every person has to be decisive. Every person has to own the responsibility and say whatever it may come, we will face it. But let us take a decision. So I think we are at such a stage of economy whereby we need to be definitive. We cannot be tentative. We need to take action, whether it's a regulator, whether it's a lender, whether it's a borrower, or for that matter, even employees. Employee also has to say, okay, why my salary is cut? Salary is cut because of the reason for a sustainability of the business. So I think in our book, we have explained that how someone could be a successful. And I find in many of my cases, mostly that when they hit the problem and their turnaround has made them 100 times better than what they were before. So I feel that these are the opportunity that if you can handle the tough time with your sincerity, with your tenacity, and with the commitment, I think you can be into a different orbit. You can be into a different league altogether. So let us make use of this time as a time to introspect, a time to rebuild ourselves. And I think even currently in restructuring, the current regulation do permit you that if you have a problem, you reach out to the banker, they will have to do a restructuring. I think it's a social stigma which is creating a problem. And when you delay your communication of problem, then after go to 1 or 2 year to the lender, then you face NCLT, then you face a trust deficit, and so on and so forth. So I know that the causes of financial distress cannot be only the COVID and all. I think there are many causes. Like see in India, the mining sector ban was a cause of stress. PPA not honored is also a cause of stress. 2G scam is also cause of stress. Metal cycle going down is also cause of stress. Infrastructure sector, the government arbitration claim not getting settled for 3 year, 5 year, 10 year is also a cause of stress. So pandemic is a cause of stress. So I think we really need to build our mindset around that stress or adversity is going to be part and parcel of our syllabus. Let us understand how to handle it well, how to handle it honestly, and all of us have to be definitive in our approach. Then I think it's workable. And at least in my case, it has worked very well. That having a 5 crore problem and resolving 1,50,000 crore, I used to curse God that, hey God, why did I had this problem? Maybe God had a different design to take me away from a normal investment banker to a special situation investment banker, and then so many corporate help and so many job saving. So these are the my learnings of the narrative of a Brescon story and from my side. And I feel as a India, as a country, we have a huge opportunity. I've never seen type of opportunity. And these are the time which teach us that who is adult and who is the kid during this adverse time.
Mr. Gangwal, thank you for peppering that with personal detail. Always makes a story more interesting when there is an element of self-story behind it. I would again throw it open to any comments, interventions by the co-panelists before we move on to questions and remarks by Anil Nair. Anybody had a question for Mr. Gangwal? Or any remarks, statements, add-ons? Okay. Anil, I think if the time is right, if you want to add something or add a question at this point before we take the audience question. You have to unmute, Anil. Unmute first.
I have a question for Dr. Singh. I have put it in the chat box.
Right, I saw.
Because he's a person who has worked as a policymaker, a banker, an academic. He has several hats throughout his career. So I was asking, why Indian banks and institutions are reluctant lenders, and how can we bring in a change in mindsets?
See, my thought is like this. Firstly, I totally acknowledge the fact that there is a mindset problem. Totally acknowledge that fact. Secondly, as you know, there are traditional answers for that. That after all, a banker doesn't own money. He has the deposits which he has collected, and he has to lend. He is just in the business of intermediation. So he doesn't own the money. And therefore, if he lends the money and the money doesn't come back, the depositors are going to take care of him. And in case he's not having a viable answer which is commercially acceptable, the Reserve Bank is the regulator, the supervisor is going to put him under prompt corrective action. So the managing director and the executive director and the board is always very worried that where is the money? If we get into prompt corrective action, everybody is tarnished, right? So therefore, there is reluctance. Now, what I'm suggesting is, and this is for all of us, Anil, this is for all of us. If we want to become a $5 trillion economy, each one of us have to think like a $5 trillion economy. We cannot continue with business as it is. We are today only $2.5 trillion economy, and $2.5 trillion economy after 75 years of independence is not a great going. China is $12 trillion economy. You become a $5 trillion economy or a $12 trillion economy by thinking about it. and then working out on a strategy with it. As Mr. Gangwal gave his excellent example, that you have to confess there is an error that has happened somewhere. I need to revisit my strategy. I think similarly, the whole country, which includes the bankers and the people who are appointed as the managing directors, do they really visualize that if I have to finance a $5 trillion economy and till about $20 trillion economy or $15 trillion economy, the way we go about, banks will continue to play a prominent role. To convert India from a 2.5 to a $5 trillion economy, the banks will continue to play a very important role. MSMEs, large sector, mudra loans, these are all the money that is going to come through the banking system, because banking system not only intermediates, it also takes care of the risk. And the depositors have confidence that somebody is doing risk assessment and then lending it. So how many of us are ready to think and strategize for a $5 trillion economy? That is why for some time now, and I'll conclude within a second, that is why for some time now, I have been saying, we had Narsimham 1, we had Narsimham 2, now we need Narsimham 3. And this Narsimham 3 has to be a financial sector roadmap to a $5 trillion economy. Until you have a roadmap where you fit in, and now we don't have just commercial banks. We have commercial banks, foreign banks, private banks. We have urban cooperative banks and rural cooperative banks. We have non-banking finance companies. We have payment banks. We have small banks. They all have to fit in. We still have regional rural banks. We still have lead banks. They all have to fit in. And then we start our journey into the $5 trillion economy. So we need a roadmap. That roadmap is missing. The last point I want to make is the financial institutions, banks, to use a common terminology, are also running into losses. They are the ones who are facing the twin balance sheet problem. When the corporate has a stress on their balance sheet, the commercial banks have a problem on their balance sheet because it reflects very quickly. I was thinking asset monetization that the government has announced for the public sector, and I told you the sectors that there are, lots of them. Why can't the banks be told to monetize their own assets? Many banks have empty buildings, empty houses. Why can't they be told to start considering monetization of their empty assets? And that will probably build in robustness into the financial institution. Once you are robust, then your decision making is different from the decision making when you are always on the brink of getting into a prompt corrective action. Thank you.
Great. Anil, I think also you had a question for Anubha. Should I go ahead? You can ask her.
But there are several questions that need to be, there are three, four questions.
I just wanted to add on to the question which you asked to Dr. Charan Singh. It's a little funny story, but probably it will give you a sense. In mid 2019, post my raising capital, I was sitting on a 600 plus crore of cash. And at that time, I started, reaching out to banks to propagate EGROW so that at some point in time, they can start borrowing from the banks. It was once my secretary set up a meeting with the bank, which was a much smaller bank. The size of their capital was roughly 50% of our capital. I at 3 o'clock reached their office and stood at reception. My meeting was only with the head of corporate banking, not with the CEO, not with the MD. When I asked the receptionist, where is this gentleman? He said, he's not here. So I then called him on his mobile phone and I said, I am here, sir, for meeting with you. He said, sir, you're Mr. Nath, I'm already sitting in your office and waiting for you. So I said, I'm so sorry, sir. When against somebody, the name of bank come, generally I presume that it is I who have to go to the bank. Bank never comes to my office, right?
Yeah.
So this is the issue of culture. So think of somebody like me who ran financial services for 15, 20 years, raised 1,000 crore of capital. When it came to a question of meeting with a bank, in my mind, I presume that I have to go to the bank. Bank never comes to me. So this is the problem. This is a problem of a mindset which is embedded with us, wherein lenders generally feel lending is an obligation, not a service. And unless we don't change that, nothing would change.
That's a fantastic sort of look in really to the mindset, to the psyche of the Indian consumer and the way we've dealt with banks for so many years. It is changing. but it's changing at a glacial pace. It's changing far slower than we would like it to change, but it's a very slow progress. I'm sure everybody would agree with that. We have more questions, I believe, from the audience we got earlier. I can insert that those questions in, and anybody can take them as and when they feel like they can answer it. I think it's from a viewer called Bhavya Jain. Her first question is on restructured book in MSME. Unsecured loans, she says, might be quite stressed book, while the cases restructured under framework 1 of COVID restructuring have also gotten further impacted by the second wave. How does the financial sector plan to deal with the stressed portion of the book? Would anyone like to take that question?
I can take that if you want.
Yes, please.
So, Bhavya, two questions of your one is about over leveraging of MSME. So today, fortunately for us, you don't need to go and ask a customer what is happening in their life. The data, especially the bureau footprint, allows you to look at everything. So how much is, so today when the ECGS scheme came, it said that it can be extended only to the customers who have an aggregate borrowing of up to 25 crore across all the lenders. Now you don't go to the lender and ask who your lender is and who you take this. You can just fetch the bureau data, you get to know that. So whether at a point of restructuring, whether you're giving extending other credit, whether when you are giving unsecured loan, we get to know the existing outstanding credit, and depending upon your analysis of the cash flow, which also again can be done through data, which is when once the OKIN and account aggregation would come, it would become much easier. But today also with just analyzing the banking statement and GST, you can do that. With respect to the first set of restructuring and second set of restructuring, as I said in my opening remarks, that unfortunately we all believed, and because we did a very early lockdown which was very harsh and rigorous, we presumed that India would stand out vis-a-vis any other country in the world. There'll be no second round of pandemic. All policy decision making were designed to only take care of the one round of pandemic, and obviously that was not be the case. We had a very severe second round of pandemic, and now we are seeing that the restructure account need to be restructured again. And I think so it would be, but there is not, generally it is presumed, and this is, on all my debt presentation, rating agency presentation, investor presentation, first question people ask, what is the percentage of total restructured debt in your balance sheet? Fortunately for us, that's very low, but it is kind of a stigma, so there is a presumption that in restructured account means something has gone wrong. No, but that's not true. Restructure means that because of a very hostile situation, somebody who was earning 10 lakh rupees a month is now earning 5 lakh rupees a month. His EMI obligation was 4 lakh. Now you have to restructure to make sure that his EMI obligation is only 2 lakh rupees. So the balance he can continue paying salary, infrastructure cost, and he pay this loan over a longer tenure period of time. So I think so as long as lending institutions are taking that conscious call and not treating restructuring as something has really gone wrong and monitor the performance of their underlying customer, it should be okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Dr. Charan Singh, you want to add something to that? I think part of her question,
You know
Shachindra
what?
answered. She also, Dr.
If-
Singh, she also wants to
yeah.
know a bit about, I think she says my question is due to increase in number of unsecured lending institutions. How are financial institutions to deal with high leverage MSMEs in a delicate situation like this, and how they can manage the PAR to sustainable levels?
So, you know what? First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Nath for beautiful analysis that he gave now and earlier also. I really like this co-lending model with Bank of Baroda, and that is really amazing. I also like the stamp that he said digitally, if we do well, then I can enhance the credit guarantees. And I think this is a great idea that he has. So I must compliment him. Now, when it comes to the restructuring and MSMEs, Mr. Nath would agree with me. All four fingers are not the same. And in our own country, there are people whose intentions are not the same.
Yeah.
On the pretext of restructuring, you can find many things happening.
Yeah.
And that is the sad part. In the world of business, while I am propagating, openly saying, repeatedly saying, if you want to be a $5 trillion economy, you have to ride on the shoulders of the private sector. And the private sector is just not the 5 large industrialists. The 6 crore MSMEs are playing an equally important role. I totally agree. The 6 crore has to become. After all, the demographic dividend is such that I have so many young people at my in my country. 6 crore MSMEs only employ 12 crore people. If urbanization has to take place, then from the rural area also young people are going to come into the city. All of them are going to get absorbed into MSME, and now MSME definition is widened. They'll all come into MSME. These MSMEs have to be under priority sector. The banks love to give money under priority sector into MSMEs. The money has to flow. They are the ones who are going to sustain employment. Keep young people engaged. If you don't keep young people engaged, just give them money, their mind is free, there'll be social crime in the country. That is so important, MSMEs. But when it comes to restructuring, all types of people come. And on the pretext of restructuring and saying, sir, don't you know COVID has taken place? I came across a case. This is amazing. Sir, please restructure our loan. Why? Sir, in the neighboring village, there is a flood. In the neighboring village, sir, not in your village. Sir, if it has happened there, it will happen here too. When it happens, we will restructure for you. If this is the way you get into the banking system for restructuring, now you imagine how cautious you have to be. Now, sad part is, it is not, sir, a stray case. The sad part is, it is the trend case. Because, sir, I'm hearing that there is a drop in the temperature, therefore I put on my woolens. That doesn't happen in business. The banking sector is stressed too. And it is the depositors' money we are sitting on. And that is what we are paid for. You know, in one time, and I will not take any names, I was fired by a very top-notch person in this country for not realizing that the COVID is such a big critical thing and you are not releasing money under the SIDBI conditions for MSME startup. And I said, for whom? 1 crore, whom should I give? And for what? And I am only asking you a certain basic questions of KYC. We are not able to fulfill. Don't you know that Prime Minister has allowed so many things? So there are too many challenges when it comes to real life through these corridors. Many people try to enter in who have no ethical values. But the banker is answerable because he is answerable to the depositors. He is answerable to the regulator. Your neck is anytime ready to be chopped off. And that is how risky it is. Now coming to the point of the last point, and I know we are running out of time, is how are the financial institutions going to handle it? Honestly speaking, very, very transparently, very fortunate, the regulator in this country, the government, the finance ministry, and the Department of Financial Services in this country, they have been very, very cautious. Even if you read the speech by the governor given 3 days back in CNBC, where he says the capital adequacies have been adequately maintained in our country. What does that mean? The banks have enough buffers, and those buffers are happy to absorb the stress points that the MSMEs will bring in. My request is, everybody is listening, and this will be on the recorded on all sort of media. My request is to MSMEs in native language, please do not misuse this facility. Because when you misuse, the genuine ones will suffer. I like the way Mr. Nirmal mentioned it. What is the mistake of the bank? And the way he handled the loan restructuring from 10 years, he paid it in all in 2 years. That should be the attitude. If I keep the bank happy, happy doesn't mean that I have to do anything extra. Just repay whenever I can. Don't go to them when I need not. They will be able to lend to others who will be able to use it more productively. So FIs at this point of time are in a position to absorb, but my request is all of us have to be responsible citizens and ensure we don't stress the banking system. At this point, the banking system is a nerve center for the country. It has provided enough support, served as a big buffer to the business. The tax collection and the fiscal authorities are pretty weakened in the sense that they don't have resources, they are borrowing. Debt to GDP ratios are rising. The Reserve Bank is playing a role, but we as citizens have also a role to play and MSMEs
Right.
have an important role to play. Thank you.
I hope Bhavya Jain got his answer. I think Mr. Gangwal, if he's still with us, since we're still on restructuring, some final comments on what we've heard today. Mr. Gangwal, if you can hear me, your comments. I don't think Mr. Gangwal is connected right now. Anubha, there's a question for you. I think Anil might have wanted to ask you this. I'll ask on his behalf if he doesn't mind. You said there are more liquidations in India than actual resolutions. What would you put that down to? Is it just because there is a very clear problem with the time frame and the resolution and the kind of time it takes for the most basic cases, really? To be resolved. Do you think it's just that the problem of time or turnaround time, or obviously I'm guessing there is a more layered approach to it?
Yeah, actually, it's not just time, as you rightly mentioned. It is a lot to do with the fact that as an investor, you do want to invest in stressed assets, but there isn't enough platform to do that. So that's also a reason why a company goes into liquidation. So when a resolution professional who's supposed to work towards resolution is not able to come up with a potent resolution plan, because it is unable to access a platform, like I mentioned in the presentation as well, like a digital platform which has the wide variety and the wide array of assets available from and that's how purchases can happen. So that is one reason why it falls into liquidation. Another reason is that we don't focus on the economic value and we only focus on the fair market value of the asset, which can be much lower than the economic value. Although with everything that's happening, corporates are realizing the importance of human capital, because a lot of emphasis was earlier put on infrastructure, which is now put on human capital. So that problem also we see should change. And another reason is that our focus is also more on liquidation, because there are few cases which are highlighted and they are in the media, but there are a lot of other matters which have been settled out of court also. So for resolution to happen, I think what is needed is that all these intermediaries, they need to be strengthened, and there should be a digitized platform available, because IBBI, on its website, if you know the name of the company which is getting liquidated. So if I know that X is getting liquidated, and I today as an investor say want to invest in a hydro project, and I know that X company is in hydro project and it is getting liquidated, I can go on the website and I can check and I can see if I want to invest in that company or not. But if as an investor, I do not know the name of the company that is going into liquidation, there should be an available data or available information for me to be able to invest in that stressed asset. So it's not that the consumer or the investor, or like we say, it's not that the market doesn't have liquidity or money, but it doesn't have the right resource. And therefore, the resolution professional also, as an intermediary, suffers these intrinsic challenges, that there isn't. So what it uses is its own resources, or rather its own contacts, to be able to bring a potential buyer to a stressed asset. So I think that also needs, that kind of digitization and platform also needs to come about, so that there is lesser liquidation, and the companies that can be revived are not put into liquidation. They are given a stronger holdout, like a bad bank, which can hold on to these companies, give them a loan for a while for them to sustain. I mean, to understand that there is future potential for these companies and they do not need to be closed at this very moment. Like in the COVID scenario, it is the hotel and the food industry which is suffering. So that doesn't need closure at this point, and maybe it can sustain for another year or 2 years, because yes, it will suffer its losses. But if there is a bad bank or a holdout which actually holds on to these companies, it will be possible for them to revive. So this mindset is important, that IBC actually came about not as a debt recovery law, but as a resolution law, where the idea is for the entity to go on and to continue and not to get liquidated, which if it eventually has to, it has to, but to be able to give it enough support system to continue.
There you go. Any other comments at this point, Shachindra? Yes, Dr. Charan Singh wants to.
Yeah,
Yes.
Anubha, I just, because you are the expert and I'm not, I just wanted to verify from you. I thought in some cases it is better to liquidate so that the asset is better, fruitfully, optimally utilized and goes into a fresh thinking process. Whereas if you go for a resolution, the same old team is working, they can't think out of the box and the asset gets wasted. Would that be the right analysis?
No, it depends on a case-to-case basis, I would presume.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Singh.
Case
It
to
would
case?
actually depend. There could be certain assets or certain companies where there would be no other way but to liquidate. And then we could, of course, go for liquidation. But there are certain industries where a holdout is important. Like, for example, I would want to even mention here government companies. Now, airlines or railways, which are state-owned companies, they go into protracted litigation, which is not of any use because the state anyway protects them. So it is best that they are not put into liquidation at all. A separate resolution is worked out for them because litigation only goes on for a long period of time. So depending on the nature of business and the kind of stressed asset, a decision can be taken. Well, if the liquidation value is higher and the economic value is lower, then we don't have a choice. But if the economic value is higher than the liquidation value, it is possible to sustain the business.
Thank you.
All right. Anil, any interventions from your end? Do you think we've crossed our 90-minute limit? I can't hear you.
I think we should close the meeting unless Dr. Nath has something to say.
No,
Shachindra?
no, I think it's, thank you.
Okay, I hope anybody who was tuned in right now in this live session did get what they were looking for. It was a fairly exhaustive session on what we face after almost 2 years of a pandemic and never seen before in 100 years phenomena, which clearly affected not just life at a socio-economic level, but also devastated a lot of businesses, small, medium businesses across the world. I hope we've provided this platform to at least start a dialogue about how to look at recovery, how to use the different tools at our disposal to your own advantage, how to go about making sure that recovery in the face of not just a pandemic. And I think I'll go back to just one particular point that struck me from Mr. Gangwal's presentation. He has a very, hold no prisoners, take no prisoners attitude about adversity. I mean, that's the sense I got from it. He said, COVID or no COVID, pandemic or no pandemic, if you have a good product, if you have a good firm, you have a working product, you'll manage to overcome the odds. And that kind of take no prisoners attitude perhaps has helped him, has helped many other companies as well. Perhaps not just innovating, but also toughening up internally, toughening up the mind and putting our mind to something and making sure the pandemic or no pandemic, the product goes on, the company goes on, as well as everyone associated with that particular entity. Well, I must thank all of you for joining us. Shachindra, Nath of EGROW Capital, Nirmal, Gangwal of Brescon Allied Partners, Anubha, Agarwal of Corporate Law Group, as well as Dr. Charan Singh, Chairman EGROW Group and EGROW Capital. Anil Nair, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all for joining us. Do check out every social that Policy Circle has to offer on your social media platforms. It's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn, as well as policy_circle on Twitter. Do check out the latest stories on governance, on political economy, and business and corporates. Thank you all for joining us. We must thank Tata Steel, that are main sponsors of Leadership Summit 2021. Thank you, Tata Steel and Pankaj Satija, for your support. And thank you all for joining us on this particular session of Leadership Summit 2021. Thank you for joining us. Keep tuned to Policy Circle.